The station called Helios Prime hung in the blackness of space, like a silver wheel spinning slowly against the stars. It was neutral ground. Every species in the known galaxy sent their leaders here once a year, to talk, to argue, to show off, and sometimes to make peace. The gravity inside was set to a level that most alien species found comfortable, about 60% of what humans felt back on Earth. Queen Ilara Voss of the United Human Territories stepped off her shuttle and into the docking bay with her hands in her pockets. Behind her came Kale Doran, her chief advisor, carrying a datapad and a permanent expression of worry. Behind him walked two Marines in dress uniforms who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. And that was it. That was the entire human delegation. Kale leaned close to her ear. Every other species brought hundreds of people. The Seshari brought 200 warriors in full armor. We look like we got lost on the way to a lunch meeting. Good, Ilara said. I hate crowds. She was not what most aliens expected when they heard the word queen. She was of average height for a human woman. Her dark hair was cut short and practical. Her face carried the kind of lines that came from years of hard work, first as a combat engineer in the Frontier Corps, and then as a politician who actually showed up to the places she governed. She wore a simple dark blue suit, with no jewels, no crown, and no weapon, at least none that anyone could see. The docking bay opened into the grand reception hall, and Ilara stopped for just a moment to take it in. The hall was enormous. Its ceiling rose high enough to hold clouds, and its floor was polished stone that reflected the light of 1,000 floating lanterns. Delegations from dozens of species filled the space. There were the Fellaini, small and cat-like, moving in quick, nervous groups. There were the Corvathi, huge and heavy, each one the size of a small car, draped in silks and trade medallions. There were species Ilara had only read about in briefing documents, tall ones, short ones, ones that floated, ones that crawled. And then there were the Seshari. They stood on the far side of the hall, like a wall of dark chitin and muscle. Each one rose 8 or 9 feet tall, their bodies a blend of reptile and insect, covered in natural armor plating that gleamed under the lantern light. They carried ceremonial blades on their backs and moved with the slow, heavy confidence of creatures who had never once in their evolutionary history needed to run from anything. At their center stood Warlord Virak Tone Cesar, Supreme Commander of the Seshari Dominion. He was the largest of them, his 4 arms folded across a chest that could have stopped a bullet. His eyes, 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows of 3, swept the hall with the calm patience of a predator watching prey it had not yet decided to eat. Those 6 eyes found the human delegation and lingered. "That is their queen?" Virak said to the scholar standing beside him. Scholar Irethi Vaughn, his cultural advisor, adjusted her data lenses and nodded. Ilara Voss, elected sovereign, former military engineer. She has governed the United Human Territories for 9 years. She brought 4 people. She did. Virak made a sound deep in his throat that might have been amusement or might have been contempt. Either she is a fool, or she believes she does not need protection. Irethi said nothing. She had been studying humans for 30 years, and had learned that the safest assumption about them was no assumption at all. Across the hall, Ilara moved through the crowd with an ease that surprised even Kale. She shook hands with the Fellaini ambassador, who came up to her waist. She exchanged polite words with a Dravosi trade minister whose body was mostly gas contained in a pressure suit. She smiled, she listened, and she said very little about what she actually wanted, which was a non-aggression corridor for human trade ships passing through Seshari space. That negotiation would come tomorrow. Tonight was for watching and being watched. Kale stayed close, feeding her names and titles through a small earpiece. The large one at your 2 o'clock is Delegate Morath of the Corvathi Trade Federation. He controls 60% of the shipping lanes we need. He does not like us. Does anyone here like us? Alara asked. The Fellini seem friendly. The Fellini are friendly to everyone. That is how they survive. They moved through the hall for another hour, and Alara kept her observations quiet and her manner calm. She noticed how the other delegations moved around the Sashari, the way water moves around a rock, with respect and distance. She noticed how the Korvathi delegate Morath kept glancing at the Sashari warlord with something that looked like fear, wearing the mask of politeness. She noticed how the smaller species stayed near the walls. What she did not notice, because to her it was not worth noticing, was the moment near the end of the evening when everything changed. A servant, one of the small insectoid station workers, was struggling to move a heavy piece of furniture out of a walkway. It was a chair throne built for a Korvathi delegate, a massive thing made of stone and metal that weighed as much as a small vehicle. The servant was pushing against it without success, its thin arms trembling with the effort. Alara was in the middle of a sentence. She was telling Kale about her plan for the next day's opening statement. Without pausing, without looking away from Kale, she reached down with one hand, gripped the base of the chair, and lifted it. She carried it 3 steps to the side, set it down gently, and gave the servant a small nod. Then she went right back to talking about trade tariffs. She did not see the servant freeze in place, staring at her with all 5 of its eyes wide open. She did not see the cluster of Fellini diplomats nearby go completely silent. She did not see the Dravasi minister's gas body flash 3 different colors of alarm. And she certainly did not see Warlord Virak Ton Cesar, watching from 40 meters away, lower all 4 of his arms slowly to his sides. "I, Rethi," he said quietly. "I saw it," the scholar whispered. She lifted that with one hand. "I saw it. That chair weighs as much as one of my officers in full armor." Irethi swallowed. "Yes." Virak said nothing more, for a long time. He simply watched the small human woman walk away through the crowd, still talking casually about tariffs, completely unaware that she had just done something that most species in the galaxy could not do with a machine. The reception ended. The delegations returned to their quarters. The lanterns dimmed. And in the Sashari wing of the station, Warlord Virak Ton Cesar sat alone in his chamber and thought about a woman who could lift a throne with one hand and did not even think it was interesting. Tomorrow, he decided, he would watch her more closely. Alara woke early the next morning and did what she always did. She went for a run. Kale had told her not to go alone. He had said it firmly, then desperately, then with the tired voice of a man who knew he had already lost the argument. Alara had smiled, patted him on the shoulder, and walked out of the human quarters in a simple pair of running clothes and lightweight shoes. The botanical observation tier of Thelios Prime was one of the most beautiful places she had ever seen. It was an entire level of the station designed to hold living gardens from dozens of worlds. Trees with blue leaves grew beside rivers that flowed upward through magnetic channels. Flowers the size of dinner tables opened and closed in slow breathing rhythms. The air smelled like rain and something sweet that she could not name. And the gravity was still only 60% of Earth's. Alara ran, and she ran easily. Her stride was long and relaxed. Back on Earth, she could run 10 miles without stopping. Here, in this lighter gravity, her body felt like it was made of air. Each step carried her further than it should have. Each push off the ground sent her gliding forward with a smoothness that felt almost like flying. She did not think about how this looked to anyone watching. To the pair of Fellini gardeners she passed, she was a blur. To the Dravosi scientist floating near a magnetic river, she was a creature moving at a speed that should not have been possible for something on 2 legs without a motor. They stared. She did not notice. She was thinking about the trade negotiations scheduled for that afternoon, and whether the Seshari would open with threats or with silence. She slowed to a walk near the center of the garden tier, where the largest trees grew around an open courtyard paved with pale stone. The air was cooler here. She stretched her arms above her head and took a deep breath. That was when she heard the sound. It was a sharp crack, like a bone breaking, followed by a deep groan of metal under stress. Then, screaming, high, thin, terrified screaming. Ilara turned and ran toward it. A structural support beam on the far edge of the courtyard had partially collapsed. A micrometeor had struck the outer hull of the station in just the wrong place, and the force had traveled inward through the frame, cracking a beam that held up a section of the garden tier's ceiling. The beam had fallen at an angle, and beneath it, pinned against the floor by tons of metal and stone, were 4 Fellini diplomatic aides. They were small. The smallest of them weighed maybe 30 pounds. They were crying out in pain and fear, their little bodies pressed flat under debris that they had no hope of moving. Other aliens nearby were shouting, calling for station security, calling for medical teams. But the nearest response team was 10 minutes away, and the beam was still settling. Every few seconds it shifted, and the Fellini screamed louder. Ilara did not think, she did not plan, she did not calculate the weight or the risk or the political consequences. She just moved. She reached the beam in seconds, dropped to a crouch, and got her hands under the lowest edge. The metal was cold and rough against her palms. She could feel the weight of it pressing down, thousands of pounds of station infrastructure, even in the reduced gravity. On Earth, this beam would have been impossible for one person. Here it was merely terrible. She set her feet, tightened her core, and lifted. A sound came out of her throat that was not a word, but something older and deeper. The sound a human body makes when it is doing something it was never designed to do, but is doing anyway, because someone is in danger. The beam rose. 1 inch, 3 inches, 6 inches. "Move!" she shouted at the Fellini. "Move now!" They scrambled. Their small bodies slipped and clawed against the stone floor. One of them was injured and could not move its back legs, so another grabbed it by the scruff and dragged it free. One by one, they pulled themselves out from under the beam, crying and shaking and alive. Ilara held the beam for 11 seconds. Then she set it down with a controlled drop, letting it settle back against the floor with a deep boom that echoed through the garden tier. She stood up straight. She rolled her shoulders. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked, her voice steady. "Does anyone need a medic?" The Fellini aides clung to each other on the ground, staring up at her with huge wet eyes. Around the courtyard, every alien who had witnessed what just happened stood frozen in absolute silence. Ilara did not understand the silence. She had done what anyone would do. Someone was trapped, so she helped. That was all. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that directly above her, on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, stood Warlord Virak Tone Cesar. He had come to the garden tier that morning for meditation, a private ritual he performed before any important negotiation. He had been standing at the railing when the beam fell. He had watched the small human woman sprint across the courtyard. He had watched her put her bare hands under a beam that his own warriors would have needed power tools to move. And he had watched her hold it, alone, unarmored, without help, while 4 lives crawled to safety beneath her. Scholar Irethi Vaughn stood beside him. Her data lenses had recorded everything. Her hands were trembling. "Virak," she said carefully, "I must tell you something about Seshari tradition and what you have just witnessed." "Speak," Virak said. What she did, the act of lifting a great weight, barehanded, without armor, in the sight of... Irethi stopped and chose her words very carefully. "In our culture, this act has a name." Virak was quiet. "The Tor vassal," Irethi continued. "The demonstration of bearing. It is performed when a warrior wishes to propose a bond to a worthy partner. The one who proposes must lift a great weight with nothing but their own body in the presence of the one they have chosen, to prove that their flesh alone is worthy of the bond. His 6 eyes had not moved from the courtyard below, where Alara was now kneeling beside the injured Fellini aide, checking its wounds with gentle hands. "Virak," Irethi said, her voice almost pleading. "Humans do not have this custom. She does not know what she has done. This was an accident. She was simply helping the injured." The warlord finally turned his massive head to look at his advisor. When he spoke, his voice was low, and full of something Irethi had never heard from him before. "She arrived with no guard. She placed herself where I could see her. She performed the Tor vassal bare-handed, in reduced gravity, and held it for 11 seconds. He paused, and she did not even strain, Irethi. She set it down and asked if anyone needed a medic. Humans do not. She knew exactly what she was doing. She did not. No warrior performs a perfect Tor vassal by accident." He straightened to his full 9 feet and folded all 4 arms behind his back. His mandibles clicked in a pattern that Irethi recognized with growing horror as deep, solemn respect. "Prepare the ancestral blade," he said. "I will give my answer." Irethi closed her eyes. This was going to be a very long summit. Below them, completely unaware that she had just accidentally proposed marriage to the most powerful warlord in the quadrant, Queen Alara Voss helped a limping Fellini aide to its feet and asked it if it wanted some water. The negotiation was supposed to begin at midday. Ilara had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly, quietly, and with a backup plan that Kale did not know about. She expected the Sashari delegation to arrive in force, armored and aggressive, with demands wrapped in threats. She expected Warlord Virak to sit across the table like a mountain of chitin and muscle and try to intimidate her into accepting bad terms. She was not prepared for what actually happened. The doors to the negotiation chamber opened, and Virak walked in with only 4 attendants. Not 200, not 50, 4. In Sashari culture, as Kale's briefing documents had explained, the size of your retinue told everyone how you viewed the meeting. A large group meant formal business. A small group meant something personal. 4 was almost intimate. And Virak was not wearing his war armor. He wore instead a set of garments that Alara did not recognize. Dark fabric, layered with plates of something that looked like polished bone, etched with patterns that spiraled and branched like the roots of ancient trees. On his upper left arm, a band of dark metal caught the light. Kale leaned toward Alara's ear. "That is not military dress. I do not know what that is." Alara looked at Virak's face, or what passed for a face on a Seshari. His 6 eyes were focused entirely on her. His mandibles were still. His body language, which she had been trained to read from briefing materials, showed none of the aggression or dominance posturing she had expected. Instead, he carried himself with a kind of careful dignity, like a man walking into a temple. Something was wrong, or something was very different. Virak approached the table. His 4 attendants stopped at the door. He came forward alone, and as he reached the center of the room, he did something that made every alien present draw a sharp breath. He knelt. All 4 of his knees touched the floor. His massive body lowered until his head was level with Alara's. From behind his back, one of his lower arms produced an object wrapped in dark cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a blade unlike anything Alara had ever seen. It was about 2 feet long, curved gently, and made from a material that seemed to shift between white and dark gray in the light. The edge gleamed. The handle was wrapped in something fibrous and ancient. The blade itself had a texture that was not metal. It was organic, layered, grown rather than forged. "This is the Casse-Ton," Virak said, his deep voice filling the chamber. It is made from the fused bone and iron of my ancestors. It has been carried by the leaders of my line for 900 generations. There is no object more sacred in the Seshari dominion. He held it out to her on both of his upper palms. Then he spoke words that Alara's translator rendered in a calm, clear voice directly into her ear. I receive your challenge of worth. I answer with the marrow of my line. Silence. Alara stood very still. She looked at the blade. She looked at Virak. She looked at Kale, who had gone the color of old paper. Kale, she said quietly, what is happening? I think, Kale said in a voice that was almost a whisper, he just accepted a marriage proposal. Whose marriage proposal? Yours. Alara blinked. I did not propose to anyone. I am aware of that. He does not appear to be. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Every eye in the room was on Alara. Virak remained kneeling, the blade extended, his 6 eyes patient and still. Alara did something that surprised everyone. She reached out and took the blade. It was heavier than it looked, warm to the touch, and it hummed faintly in her hand, as if the bone it was made from still remembered being alive. Thank you, she said. This is beautiful. Could you excuse me for one moment? She turned, walked to the far side of the room, grabbed Kale by the arm, and pulled him through a side door into a small meeting room. She closed the door behind them. Explain, she said. Kale was already pulling up files on his datapad. The Tor Vassal. It is a Seshari bonding ritual. A warrior proposes by performing a feat of strength. Raw physical strength, no weapons, no armor, in the presence of the one they wish to bond with. Yesterday, in the garden, you lifted that beam. He was watching. I was saving people. Yes, and in doing so, you performed what he considers a perfect traditional proposal. Alara leaned against the wall and stared at the ceiling. So the most powerful military leader in this part of the galaxy thinks I asked him to marry me. That is correct. Because I picked up a beam. Yes, and he said yes. With his ancestor's sacred blade, yes. Alara was quiet for 5 seconds. Then she started laughing. It was not mocking laughter. It was the deep, helpless laughter of a woman who had survived wars and elections and budget negotiations, and who now found herself holding an alien bone sword because she had been too strong at the wrong time in the wrong place. Kale did not laugh. Alara, this is serious. If you reject the blade, you are declaring his bloodline unworthy. That is the worst insult in Seshari culture. It could mean war. The laughter faded. Alara looked down at the blade in her hand. So I cannot say no. Not directly. Not without consequences that could cost lives. Kale opened it to find Scholar Irethi Vaughn standing in the hallway, looking like a woman who had been running. Behind her, 2 Seshari guards watched with visible confusion. Queen Voss, Irethi said, slightly out of breath. I have been trying to reach you. I must explain. I know what happened, Alara said. I accidentally proposed to your warlord by lifting a beam. Irethi blinked all 6 of her eyes. You are taking this better than I expected. I have been through worse. Tell me my options. Irethi stepped inside and closed the door. She spoke quickly and clearly. You cannot reject the blade, but you do not have to accept the bond. There is a middle path. It is called the Tor Kase, the trial of consideration. It is a series of challenges between the proposer and the one who was proposed to. It allows both sides to test each other. At the end, either side can withdraw with honor by declaring the other worthy but unmatched. How long does it take? A few days. 3 challenges. It will buy you time, and it gives you a path out that does not insult him. Alara thought about it for less than 10 seconds. I accept the trial. Kale closed his eyes. Of course you do. They returned to the negotiation chamber. Virak had not moved from his kneeling position. The other delegations were still watching in stunned silence. Ilara walked up to the warlord, still holding his ancestral blade. She looked up at him. Even kneeling, he was taller than her, and spoke clearly so that every translator in the room could catch her words. I accept the trial of consideration. Let us test each other. Virak rose. He rose slowly, unfolding his massive body until he stood at his full 9 feet, towering over her, like a monument carved from dark stone. His mandibles clicked in a pattern that Irethi, standing at the edge of the room, recognized as the deepest expression of satisfaction the Sashari language could produce. Then we shall see, Virak said, his voice like distant thunder, what your world has bred. Ilara held his gaze without flinching. Yes, she said, you will. By that evening, every news outlet in the galaxy had the story. The headlines were variations of the same idea. The human queen and the alien warlord, a bond nobody expected, a trial that would be watched by billions. Some outlets called it a political stunt. Some called it a love story. Some called it the most dangerous diplomatic incident in a century. In his private quarters, Delegate Morath of the Korvathi Trade Federation read the headlines and saw opportunity. If this alliance formed, if the humans and the Sashari actually joined forces, his people's shipping monopoly would be over. Everything he had built would be threatened. He reached for his private communication channel and sent a message to someone who did not officially exist. The game was changing, and not everyone wanted it to change. The first challenge came the next morning. Virak chose it, as tradition demanded. The one who answered the proposal chose the first test. He invited Ilara to the Sashari wing of the station, to a chamber that had been cleared of all furniture except a stone pedestal at its center. On the pedestal sat a single object, a rough, dark stone about the size of a fist, glowing faintly orange along its cracks. The hearthstone, Irethi explained quietly, standing beside Ilara at the entrance. It is heated to extreme temperatures using a chemical reaction. The challenge is to hold it in your bare hand for as long as you can without releasing it. Among the Sashari, it is a coming-of-age test. Warriors hold it to prove their will is stronger than their pain. Ilara asked, how long does a Sashari warrior usually hold it? Ilara asked. Irethi hesitated. The average is 40 seconds. Virak held his for 1 minute and 12 seconds during his own trial. It is still a record among living Sashari. Ilara looked at the stone. It was radiating heat she could feel from 3 meters away. And if I drop it? You lose this challenge. It is not the end of the trial, but it would be noted. Kale, standing behind them, leaned forward. You do not have to do this. We can find another way. Ilara ignored him. She walked forward to the pedestal. The chamber was full. Sashari warriors lined the walls, their dark bodies still and silent. On a raised platform, Virak sat watching, his 6 eyes unblinking. Galactic press drones floated near the ceiling, recording everything. Ilara reached out and picked up the stone. The pain was immediate. It was like holding a piece of the sun. Every nerve in her hand screamed at her to let go, to throw it away, to do anything other than what she was doing. She could smell something that she realized with distant calm was her own flesh beginning to burn. She closed her fingers around it and held on. She had been trained for this. Not for this specific test, but for pain. The human military taught its soldiers to endure. They called it stress inoculation, the practice of exposing the body to controlled suffering until the mind learned to keep working through it. Ilara had been through it all. Cold water immersion, sleep deprivation, simulated capture. She had learned long ago that pain was a message from the body, and like any message, you could choose not to answer it. She controlled her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She fixed her eyes on a point on the far wall and let the pain become something distant, something happening to someone else. 10 seconds, 20, 30, 40. She passed the average. The HFY warriors shifted. Small sounds of surprise rippled through the chamber. 50 seconds, 60. She passed the 1-minute mark. Virak leaned forward in his seat. 70 seconds, 80. At 1 minute and 20 seconds, Ilara set the stone back on the pedestal. She did not drop it. She placed it down gently, with control, and then stood with her burned hand at her side, her face calm and her eyes clear. The chamber was silent. Then Virak rose to his feet and struck his upper fists against his chest, the HFY gesture of acknowledged strength. One by one, his warriors did the same. The sound of it filled the room like a drumbeat. Irethi treated Ilara's hand afterward with a medical gel that the HFY used for heat injuries. Ilara flexed her fingers and said nothing about the pain. You held it 8 seconds longer than Virak, Irethi told her quietly. I was not counting, Ilara lied. The second challenge was Ilara's to choose. She chose a war game. They set it up in a holographic tactical chamber, a room that could project entire star systems in miniature, with fleets of tiny light ships that moved according to each commander's orders. It was a simulation of a full-scale naval engagement. 2 fleets of equal size, no advantages given to either side. Virak was a brilliant military commander. Everyone knew this. He had won 17 major campaigns and had never lost a fleet engagement. He expected the human queen to try to match him in direct combat, ship against ship, formation against formation. She did not. Ilara did not attack his fleet at all. Instead, she pulled her ships back and targeted his supply lines. She sent small, fast groups to hit his fuel depots, his communication relays, his repair stations. She did not try to destroy his warships. She tried to starve them. Virak adapted quickly, pulling forces back to defend his logistics. But every time he moved to protect one target, Ilara hit another. She was not fighting a battle. She was fighting a war, a long, slow, grinding war of resources and patience. It took 2 hours. Virak's fleet, still powerful, still dangerous, found itself unable to move. No fuel, no supplies, no communications. His warships sat in empty space with full weapons and empty tanks, and Ilara's fleet circled them like wolves around a frozen animal. Virak studied the holographic display for a long time. Then he made a gesture with his lower right hand that Irethi translated as formal concession. You fight like water, he said to Ilara across the tactical display. You go where the stone is not. Thank you, Ilara said. I think. It was a compliment, Irethi confirmed. The third challenge was the one everyone had been waiting for. The test of blood. A physical duel. Tradition said it was not to the death. It was a contest of dominance. Fight until one side could not continue. Virak chose the location, an open sparring ring in the station's combat training tier, surrounded by raised seating that was packed full within an hour of the announcement. Every delegation on the station sent observers. The Galactic press sent every drone they had. Ilara arrived in lightweight sparring clothes. No armor, no weapons. Kale stood at the edge of the ring with a medical kit and an expression of barely controlled terror. Virak entered from the opposite side. Without his ceremonial garments, his body was fully visible for the first time. 9 feet of layered muscle and natural armor. 4 arms, each thick enough to crush stone. Legs built for explosive power. He moved like something designed by nature to end things quickly and violently. He outweighed Ilara by 400 pounds. The signal sounded, and Virak charged. He was fast. For something his size, he was terrifyingly fast. His upper arms swept toward her, in a grapple that would have ended the fight in seconds, if it had landed. It did not land. Ilara moved. In the station's reduced gravity, she was something else entirely. She ducked under his arms, rolled to his side, and was behind him before his momentum could stop. She did not try to hit him. Hitting his natural armor would be like punching a wall. Instead, she moved. She kept moving. She made him chase her. And this was the thing about humans that the galaxy did not understand. It was not that they were the strongest. It was not that they were the fastest. It was that they did not stop. Virak was a burst predator. His species had evolved to attack in short, devastating rushes. He could move with explosive power for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, at a level that nothing in the galaxy could match. But then, he needed to rest. His muscles demanded it. His biology required it. Ilara was an endurance predator. Her species had evolved to chase things across open plains for hours, to run and walk and run again until whatever they were following simply could not run anymore. Her heart was built for sustained effort. Her body cooled itself with sweat. Her muscles were designed to work and work and work. She ran Virak in circles for 12 minutes. Every time he lunged, she dodged. Every time he rested, she pressed closer, forcing him to move again. She used joint locks when his arms overextended, twisting against his limbs at angles his armor could not protect. She was not trying to hurt him. She was trying to exhaust him. At the 12-minute mark, Virak dropped to one knee. His breath came in great heaving gasps. His forearms hung at his sides. His body, built for war, had nothing left to give. Ilara stood in front of him. She was breathing hard too, her skin flushed, sweat running down her face. But she was standing. She extended her hand to him. The gesture had no Sashari meaning. There was no word for it in their language, no tradition, no ritual. It was a purely human act, the offer of help to a fallen opponent, the statement that the fight was over, and what came next was respect. Virak looked at her hand. Then slowly, he reached out with one of his massive upper arms and took it. She helped him to his feet. The crowd did not know how to react. The Sashari warriors stared in confusion. The other species watched with wide eyes. But Virak, standing once more at his full height, looked down at the small human woman who had just beaten him by refusing to stop. And his mandibles clicked in a pattern that only Irethi recognized. It was not the sound of defeat. It was the sound of wonder. Later, alone in his quarters, Virak sat in the dark and spoke to Irethi. "She is the smallest creature I have ever feared," he said, and his voice held no shame, only truth. Far across the station, in a private communication room, Delegate Morath finalized his plan. The pirate flotilla was in position. The false evidence was prepared. Tomorrow, the summit would burn, and the human-Sashari alliance would die before it could be born. The attack came at dawn. Ilara was in her quarters reviewing the speech she planned to give at the summit's closing ceremony when the station shook. It was not a small tremor. The entire floor shifted beneath her feet, and the lights flickered twice before the emergency systems kicked in, flooding the room with harsh red light. Kale burst through the door. Pirate flotilla, 6 ships. They hit the station's outer ring and breached the hull in 2 locations. Orders are inside. Where? The garden tier, and they are heading toward the assembly hall. Ilara was already moving. She pulled open her travel case and reached past the diplomatic files, past the formal clothes, and found what she was looking for. Her old combat boots, and the Sashari bone blade that Virak had given her. She pulled the boots on and strapped the blade to her back. Kale stared at her. "You are not going toward the fighting." "I am absolutely going toward the fighting." "You are the queen of the United Human Territories." "Yes, and if I hide while aliens die on a station where I am a guest, every species in this galaxy learns that humans run when things get hard." She looked at him. "We do not run, Kale." He did not argue. He had known her for 15 years, and he had learned the same lesson the Seshari were learning now, that Alara Voss did not stop. Her 2 Marines were already geared up and waiting outside the door. They fell in behind her without a word, weapons drawn, faces calm. The 3 of them moved through the corridor toward the garden tier at a pace that made the station's other fleeing occupants press against the walls to let them pass. The garden tier was chaos. The beautiful trees were burning. The magnetic rivers had failed, sending water crashing down in sheets. And through the smoke and wreckage, figures were moving. Pirates, armed and armored, species Alara did not recognize, firing weapons at anything that moved. Behind them, pinned down near the courtyard where Alara had lifted the beam just days ago, a group of Fellini and Dravosi diplomats crouched behind fallen debris, unarmed and terrified. Alara drew the bone blade. It felt right in her hand. The weight of it, the warmth of it, the way it balanced perfectly, despite being made for a hand twice the size of hers. She did not think about what it meant, or what it symbolized. She thought about the people trapped behind that debris. She moved forward. Her Marines moved with her, laying down covering fire. Alara closed the distance to the nearest pirate in seconds, the low gravity turning her sprint into something that looked like a predator in flight. The pirate saw her coming and raised its weapon. It was not fast enough. The bone blade took the weapon out of its hands. The second swing put the pirate on the ground. Alara did not kill. She disabled, struck joints and limbs, used the flat of the blade when she could. She moved through the smoke like something out of a nightmare, fast and precise and utterly relentless. And then, from the far side of the garden tier, came a sound that shook the burning trees. A Seshari war cry. Virak came through the breach like a force of nature. He had not waited for orders. He had not waited for coordination. He had heard that the human queen was moving toward the fighting, and he had mobilized his warriors with a single command. She carries my ancestor's blade. If she falls holding it, my line ends in shame. Move. 50 Seshari warriors poured into the garden tier behind their warlord, and the pirates discovered very quickly that they had made a terrible mistake. Virak fought his way toward Alara. She fought her way toward him. They met in the center of the courtyard, back to back, surrounded by smoke and fire and the wreckage of what had been the most beautiful garden on the station. They fought together, and something happened that neither of them had planned. They were perfect together. His power and her speed, his reach and her precision, his explosive strength and her endless endurance. When Virak struck, he cleared space. When Alara moved through that space, she finished what he started. When he tired, she covered him. When she was pressed, he put himself between her and danger, like a wall of living armor. The pirates lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, every one of them was either on the ground or in restraints, and the garden tier was secured. Alara stood in the courtyard, breathing hard, the bone blade in her hands stained with blood. Some of it from the pirates, and some of it from a cut across her left arm, where a blade had gotten through. She had not stopped to deal with it during the fight. Virak stood beside her, his massive chest heaving. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "You are bleeding," he said. "It is not deep. You did not retreat." "No." He was silent for a moment. Then his mandibles clicked softly, and he said something in Old Seshari that Irathi, arriving breathless behind the warrior line, did not need to translate. The tone said everything. Within hours, the station's forensic teams traced the attack. The false flag fell apart quickly. The pirate ships carried Korvathi communication equipment, and their payment records led directly to Delegate Morath's private accounts. Morath was arrested before the day was over, dragged from his quarters in restraints, while shouting about trade rights and fair competition. Nobody listened. The final session of the summit was held that evening in the Grand Assembly Hall. Every delegation was present. The room was full, the press drones thick in the air like silver insects, and the silence was heavy with the weight of what everyone knew was about to happen. Ilara walked to the center of the hall. She was still wearing her combat boots. The cut on her arm had been bandaged but not hidden. In her hand, she carried the bone blade, and its surface was still dark with the dried blood of their shared enemies. She faced Virak, who stood at the head of the Sashari delegation in his full war armor, restored now to its proper glory. His warriors filled the space behind him like a dark forest. Ilara spoke, and her voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Warlord Virak, I owe you an honest truth. When I lifted that beam in the garden, I was not performing the Tor vassal. I did not know what it was. I was not proposing a bond. I was helping people who were trapped, because that is what humans do." The hall was absolutely still. I did not come to this summit to find a mate, or to make a display of strength. I came to negotiate a trade corridor, and then things got complicated. A small, quiet ripple of something that might have been laughter moved through the non-Sashari delegations. But I will not stand here and pretend that what happened between us meant nothing. You showed me the honor of your ancestors. You tested me, and I tested you, and we found something that neither of us expected. She lifted the bone blade, and with a single powerful motion, drove it into the stone floor of the assembly hall. It sank in deep, and stood upright, humming faintly, the blood on its surface catching the light. Then she spoke in Old Seshari. She had practiced the words with Irethi for an hour, and she spoke them now without hesitation, without error, in a language that no human had ever spoken before. "I do not offer my body to your line. I offer my blood to your purpose, not as a mate, but as a sword sister. Let our people's strength be one strength." She had taken their most sacred tradition and remade it. She had not rejected the bond. She had redefined it. Not a marriage, an alliance, a sisterhood of war. Two species, bound not by love, but by mutual respect and shared blood, standing together as one force. The Seshari delegation did not move, did not breathe. 500 years of tradition said that Tor vassal could only mean one thing, and this small human woman had just told 500 years of tradition that it was wrong. Virak stared at her. 10 seconds passed, 20, then he laughed. It was a sound that no one outside the Seshari dominion had ever heard. Deep, resonant, full of joy and surprise, and something that sounded almost like relief. His warriors flinched. His advisors stared. Irethi pressed her hands to her mouth. Virak stepped forward. He reached down and pulled the blade from the floor with one hand. With his other hand he drew the edge across his own palm, opening a line of dark blood. He held his bleeding hand out to Ilara. She pressed her own wounded palm against his. "Sword sister," Virak said, and his voice filled the hall like the sound of a door opening onto something vast and new. "Your world breeds monsters. I am honored to stand beside them." Applause, shouts, the clicking and humming and whistling sounds of a dozen species, reacting all at once to something that had never happened before and would never be forgotten. The Human-Seshari Martial Alliance was born in that moment. Not from a treaty negotiation, not from a political calculation, but from a misunderstanding, a rescue, a bone blade, and a woman who did not know her own strength. Within a week, every pirate group and hostile faction in the quadrant received the same quiet message through back channels. The humans and the Seshari were one force now. Think carefully before you act. Within a month, human trade ships moved through Seshari space without escort, and Seshari diplomats sat in human council chambers as honored guests. The galaxy shifted, and the center of that shift was a handshake sealed in blood on the floor of an assembly hall. Kale slept for 2 days straight after the summit ended. When he woke up, he found a message from Ilara. "Start planning next year's delegation. Virak wants to meet the Marines." On the shuttle home, Alara sat by the window and looked at the scar on her palm, where Virak's blood had mixed with hers. She flexed her hand, smiled, and sent one last message to the Sashari flagship before it jumped to faster-than-light speed. "Same time next year?" The reply came in seconds. "Bring more of your Marines. I wish to see if they are all as terrifying as their queen." Alara laughed and closed her eyes. Outside the window, the stars stretched and blurred as the ship jumped, carrying her home to a world that did not know yet how much had changed. 3 days later, a small news item appeared at the bottom of a galactic broadcast. The Fellini Diplomatic Corps had formally requested access to whatever training program human children went through after witnessing Queen Voss's rescue in the Garden Tier. The United Human Territories Department of Education had responded with a single word: recess.